The heavy oak door of my study in Oakhaven Estates felt like a barrier between two worlds, the quiet one I inhabited and the bustling, often demanding one outside. Arthur Finch, at 62 years old, had seen enough of both to know that appearances could be deceiving, especially when it came to family. People often saw me as a comfortable man, perhaps a bit too indulgent, especially with my children. They saw the house, the cars, the fine suits, and they imagined a life of ease. What they didn't see was the lifetime of work, the careful planning, the small sacrifices that built it all. And they certainly didn't see the growing shadow of doubt in my heart, a feeling that my generosity was not just being taken for granted but actively being exploited. I had two children, Emily and Mark. Emily, my daughter, was a school teacher. She had a kind heart and a quiet strength. She worked hard, lived modestly, and always seemed to find joy in the simple things. Mark, my son, on the other hand, was cut from a different cloth. He was ambitious, flashy, and always seemed to be chasing the next big thing, usually with my money. I had supported both of them in countless ways. Emily, with a down payment on her modest home, and a little extra now and then for her classroom supplies or a much-needed vacation. Mark, it was a different story. He had a penchant for startups that never quite started up, investments that always seemed to disappear, and a lifestyle that far outstripped his actual income. I had bought him a spacious house in a desirable neighborhood, a beautiful home much grander than Emily's. I paid for his expensive car, funded several of his failed business ventures, and even covered the bills for his lavish wedding. My wife, before she passed, had always cautioned me, "Arthur, you give too much," she would say. "They need to learn the value of a dollar." And I would always reply, "They are my children, Alina. I want them to have an easier life than I did." But lately, Alina's words echoed in my mind with an unsettling clarity. Mark and his wife, Jessica, treated my generosity like an endless tap, turning it on whenever they needed something, never questioning if it might ever run dry. Their calls were almost always preceded by a request, subtle at first, then increasingly bold. "Father, this new opportunity needs capital. Dad, the house needs a new roof, and we just don't have it right now. Grandpa, little Timothy needs new sports equipment and it's quite expensive." It was always something. Emily, on the other hand, called to check on me, to invite me for a simple dinner, to ask how my day was. She rarely asked for anything, and when she did, it was usually for advice or for a small favor like fixing a leaky faucet. She even tried to offer me help with things, saying, "Dad, let me handle that, you've done enough." But my wealth, my hard work, felt like a shield to her, something she respected but didn't want to rely on. To Mark, it was a weapon, a tool he could wield for his own benefit without a second thought. I loved them both, but the imbalance, the blatant disregard from one and the quiet respect from the other, had started to gnaw at me. I began to wonder what would happen if the tap ran dry. What if I wasn't the wealthy Arthur Finch anymore? Would their love, or at least their attention, still be there? This thought, once a fleeting worry, was quickly solidifying into a plan, a necessary test, because I needed to know the truth before it was too late. My heart, though heavy, was already preparing for a future where some illusions would undoubtedly shatter, and I knew I had to be strong enough to face the wreckage. The turning point, the moment the vague unease solidified into a sharp, painful certainty, happened on a Tuesday. I had decided to pay Mark and Jessica a surprise visit, bringing over some homemade shortbread that Alina used to make. I knew Jessica had a fondness for it. I arrived a little early, the front door ajar, which was unusual for them. As I approached, I heard voices from inside, Mark's distinctively loud and Jessica's sharp, reedy tone. I paused, about to call out, but something in Mark's next words made me freeze, the shortbread box still in my hand. He was laughing, a harsh, dismissive sound. "You worry too much, Jessica. Dad's practically an ATM with legs. He'll never stop funding us. He loves the grandkid too much. He's always been soft." Jessica's voice came next, a little more cautious. "But what if he gets sick? Or if one of his investments goes south? He's not getting any younger, Mark." Mark scoffed. "Please. He's got so much tucked away, it'd take a lifetime to spend. And besides, even if he did, he's got that big house. We'll just sell it, pay off whatever debts he manages to rack up, and still walk away with a fortune. He'd want us to be comfortable. He practically designed the will for us, always making sure we were provided for. My blood ran cold. An ATM with legs. The words stung not just for their cruelty, but for their accuracy. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the utter lack of respect, the assumption of inheritance, the blatant disregard for my existence as anything more than a financial resource. I felt a wave of nausea, a sickening lurch in my stomach as if I had been punched. This wasn't just a misstep or youthful ambition. This was a calculated entitlement, a deep-seated belief that they were owed my life's work. My vision blurred for a moment, the vibrant colors of their manicured garden fading into a dull gray. All the times I had brushed off my wife's warnings, all the excuses I had made for Mark's behavior, they all came crashing down around me. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a betrayal. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about my love, my care, my very identity being reduced to a financial transaction. I gripped the shortbread box so tightly my knuckles turned white. My hands trembled, but it wasn't from weakness. It was from a cold, quiet rage beginning to simmer beneath the surface. I took a deep, shaky breath, pushing down the immediate urge to storm in there and confront them, to scream at them for their callousness. But what good would that do? They would deny it, twist my words, make me out to be the irrational old man. No, this required a different approach, a patient approach, a methodical approach. I retreated silently, my footsteps muffled by the soft grass. I slipped back into my car, the shortbread still clutched in my hand, now forgotten. As I drove away, the anger slowly gave way to a chilling clarity. They thought they had me figured out. They thought they knew my every move, my every weakness. They thought I was a soft touch, an open wallet. Well, I would show them just how wrong they were. My world hadn't crumbled. It had simply revealed its true cracks. And now I would rebuild it, but this time only with the pieces that were truly solid. I would play along with their cruel game, pretend to be the ATM with legs for a little while longer. But soon that ATM would be out of service, and they would learn a very harsh lesson about loyalty, respect, and what happens when you mistake love for a bottomless fund. The days that followed that overheard conversation were a blur of quiet determination. My resolve, initially a raw wound, began to harden into a steel-like shell. I knew I couldn't confront Mark and Jessica directly. They would merely dismiss it as an old man's paranoia, twisting my words, making me feel foolish. No, this required a more subtle, more comprehensive plan. I was going to test them, and in doing so, expose their true colors not just to me, but to themselves. The first step was to establish my financial distress. This had to be believable, gradual, and public enough for Mark and Jessica to notice, yet subtle enough not to raise immediate alarms. I started by canceling some of my more visible luxury subscriptions, the premium golf club membership, the high-end wine club, the weekly fresh flower delivery to the house. Small things, but noticeable to those who paid attention. Next, I made an appointment with my financial advisor, Mr. Henderson. He was a shrewd man, always professional, and had handled my accounts for decades. I laid out my plan to him, explaining the situation with Mark and Jessica without revealing too many details, simply stating that I needed to reassess my future security and ensure my true legacy was protected. Mr. Henderson listened, his expression unreadable, then nodded slowly. He understood the nuances of family dynamics better than most. He helped me establish a new trust, an irrevocable trust, completely separate from my existing will. This trust would hold the bulk of my liquid assets, as well as a significant portion of my properties, including my house in Oakhaven Estates. The beneficiaries of this trust were clearly defined, but its existence would be known only to me, Mr. Henderson, and one other person I deeply trusted. My existing will, which had indeed favored Mark in several aspects, would remain largely unchanged on paper for now, serving as an elaborate decoy. I also began the process of quietly transferring ownership of several smaller investment properties I owned to Emily's name, through a series of legal, albeit complex, transactions that Mr. Henderson orchestrated. These transfers were disguised as gifts, carefully structured to avoid immediate scrutiny, and I made sure Emily was aware of them. explaining they were to help her plan for her retirement and secure her future. She was surprised, even tearful, thanking me profusely and insisting I didn't have to. I simply told her it was time I looked out for myself, and I wanted to ensure she was also taken care of. Her genuine gratitude was a stark contrast to the entitled silence I usually received from Mark. My next move was to create a visible, if false, impression of financial struggle. I started driving my older, less flashy car more often, parking the newer luxury sedan in the garage. I stopped having my gardener come every week, opting instead for bi-weekly visits, and started doing some of the simpler yard work myself. My clothing became a little less tailored, a little more worn. These were small adjustments, but they contributed to the narrative I was building. I also began to complain, subtly at first, about the rising cost of living, the fluctuating stock market, and a few unforeseen expenses that had cropped up. I'd mentioned these things during my calls with Mark, waiting to see his reaction. His response was almost always the same, a dismissive grunt, a quick change of subject, or a half-hearted suggestion that I should invest in one of his latest schemes. He never offered to help, never suggested cutting back on his own expenses to ease my burden. Emily, on the other hand, noticed. "Dad, you seem a little stressed," she'd say. "Are you doing okay? Can I help with anything? I could bring over dinner this week, or maybe I could help you with the yard work." Her concern felt like a warm blanket on a cold night, a balm to my aching heart. One day, I called Mark and told him I was thinking of selling my larger boat, which he often used. He scoffed. "What? That old thing? It's practically worthless now, Dad. Just keep it. I'll use it sometimes." He wasn't concerned about my financial state. He was concerned about losing a perk. I even fabricated a story about a bad investment in a startup that failed spectacularly. I dramatically sighed and told Mark it had cost me a significant chunk of my liquid savings. He merely said, "Tough break, Dad. That's why you should have gone with my idea." There was no empathy, no genuine concern for my loss, just a veiled accusation and a reminder of his own perceived superiority. This further fueled my resolve. The trap was slowly but surely being set. I was playing the role of the financially troubled patriarch, and Mark and Jessica were falling right into it, their arrogance blinding them to the intricate web I was weaving. They were so confident in their eventual inheritance, so assured of my endless resources, that they saw my manufactured decline as a mere temporary setback, perhaps even a chance for them to swoop in and manage my remaining assets. What they didn't realize was that I wasn't just preparing for a fall. I was preparing for a dramatic revelation, one that would redefine everything they thought they knew about me and about their own place in my life. The pieces were all in place, the stage was set, and the final act was drawing near. The atmosphere in my dining room that evening was thick with a false sense of concern, almost palpable in its hypocrisy. I had gathered my children, Mark and Emily, and their spouses, Jessica and David, for what I called a family discussion about my deteriorating financial situation. The table was set with simple china, not the expensive heirlooms I usually used. The meal was a modest roast chicken, a far cry from the elaborate dinners they were accustomed to. I sat at the head of the table, feeling strangely calm, like an actor about to deliver the most important lines of his career. Emily, ever observant, had noticed my somber mood. "Dad, you've been so quiet lately," she said, her brow furrowed with genuine worry. "Are you truly all right? You haven't been yourself." David, her husband, a kind and steady man, nodded in agreement. Mark, on the other hand, looked impatient, occasionally checking his expensive watch, a gift from me, of course. Jessica was eyeing the modest wine bottle with disdain. I took a deep breath. "Thank you for coming, everyone. I need to be frank with you. My financial situation has, unfortunately, taken a turn for the worse. My investments, as I've mentioned, have not performed as expected, and that failed startup. It was a much heavier blow than I initially let on." Mark waved his hand dismissively. "We know, Dad, bad luck happens. So what's the plan?" Jessica chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Yes, Arthur. We just want to make sure you're comfortable. You've worked so hard." Emily reached across the table and gently squeezed my arm. "Whatever it is, Dad, we'll figure it out. We're here for you." Mark actually snorted at that. Figure what out, Emily. Dad's always been good with money. He'll bounce back. My gaze lingered on Emily, a silent promise in my eyes. Then I turned to Mark, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside. No, Mark. I don't think I will bounce back this time. In fact, things are quite dire. I'm afraid I've depleted most of my liquid savings. And the upkeep on this house, the property taxes, it's all becoming too much. Emily gasped softly. What are you saying, Dad? I had to let the gardener go, I explained, and I've stopped the cleaning service. The gas and electric bills are astronomical. I'm seriously considering selling the house. The words hung in the air, creating a sudden, shocked silence. Jessica's eyes widened and Mark's jaw dropped. Emily's hand tightened on my arm. Sell this house. But Dad, where would you go? This is your home. Mark, however, had a different reaction. Sell the house? What? No, Dad, you caw. Think of the market. It's not a good time. He wasn't thinking of my comfort, but of his future inheritance. I continued, my voice unwavering. It's either that or I'll be forced to. Well, to significantly downsize. Perhaps even consider a smaller apartment. I just can't afford this lifestyle anymore. Mark actually pushed back his chair, a look of incredulity and anger on his face. You're telling me after all these years, all the money you've made, you're just broke. Like really broke. He couldn't even fathom it. Jessica, her face pale, added, but what about our inheritance? You've always said you'd provide for us. My provision, Jessica, was always based on my ability to provide, and it seems my ability has diminished. Emily, her eyes welling up, spoke softly. Dad, if you need help, David and I have a little bit saved. It's not much, but we could help with the taxes for a while, or you could move into our guest room. It's small, but you'd be comfortable. We'd be happy to have you. My heart swelled with a mix of pain and profound gratitude. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I turned to Mark, my voice dropping to a low, deliberate tone. And you, Mark, what are your thoughts? He stammered, his face turning an unhealthy shade of purple. Well, I mean, I'm building my own business, Dad. I'm still investing. I can't just, I don't have spare cash lying around, and our mortgage is huge. Jessica quickly nodded, adding, we have our own expenses, Arthur. We're stretched thin. I felt a cold satisfaction spread through me. The mask was off. Their true selves, raw and ugly, were now completely exposed. I slowly pushed my own chair back and stood up. I walked over to the antique mahogany cabinet in the corner of the dining room. From a hidden compartment, I retrieved a thick legal folder. I returned to the table, placing it squarely in front of Mark. Inside, Mark, are the documents for my new trust, and a revised version of my will. His eyes darted to the folder, then back to my face, a flicker of fear mixed with confusion. What is this, Dad? I smiled then, a small, sad smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. This, my son, is the reality you and Jessica have created. I paused, letting the words hang in the air, watching their faces. Mark looked increasingly agitated. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth. Emily and David watched, bewildered. I continued, my voice now resonant with authority. This house, the one you assumed you would inherit and sell, is now part of an irrevocable trust. Its primary beneficiary is Emily. And the remaining bulk of my assets, the fortune you so readily discussed, is also secured within this trust, also for Emily and her family. Mark's eyes were wide, unblinking. His face drained of all color, turning ashen. You can't do that, he stammered, his voice rising. What about me? What about your son? I looked directly into his eyes, my gaze unyielding. You, Mark, will receive exactly what you've shown you value, nothing. You will inherit only the memory of what you thought you deserved, and the bitter knowledge that your own greed cost you everything. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by Jessica's choked sob. Mark lunged for the folder, his hands trembling as he ripped it open, scanning the official-looking documents, his face morphing from disbelief to a terrifying rage. He let out a primal scream, a sound of pure fury and betrayal. This is a joke. You're just trying to scare me. This isn't real. Jessica was openly weeping now, her composure completely shattered. Emily, for her part, looked stunned. Then her eyes welled up with tears, tears of confusion, then perhaps understanding. David put a comforting arm around her. I stood there, watching Mark's unraveling, feeling a profound sadness, but also an undeniable sense of justice. The trap had snapped shut. The aftermath of that dinner was exactly as I had anticipated. a maelstrom of raw emotion, legal battles, and profound silence. Mark's initial rage quickly turned into a desperate frenzy. He screamed, he threatened. He called me every name under the sun, accusing me of being a senile old man manipulated by Emily. He even tried to suggest that Emily had somehow coerced me, but her genuine shock during the revelation quickly disproved that. He contacted his own lawyers, confident that he could somehow overturn the trust or my revised will. He claimed undue influence, senility, anything to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. My lawyers, Mr. Henderson's firm, were ready for him. They presented irrefutable evidence, the meticulously documented financial transactions, the established timeline of my decisions, the psychiatric evaluation I had undergone weeks prior to ensure my mental competency, all showing a clear, rational mind at work. The irrevocable trust, as Mr. Henderson calmly explained to Mark's lawyers, was exactly that, irrevocable. There was no loophole, no recourse. Mark was effectively cut off. When the legal avenues dried up, Mark's desperation spiraled into public shame. He began to badmouth me to anyone who would listen, spreading malicious rumors in our social circles, trying to paint me as a cruel, vindictive father. But Oakhaven Estates was a tight-knit community, and people knew me. They knew my history, my generosity, and they had witnessed Mark's extravagant lifestyle and his constant need for more. His accusations quickly fell flat, turning instead into a mirror reflecting his own character flaws. Friends and acquaintances who had always tolerated Mark out of respect for me began to distance themselves. Invitations to social events stopped coming his way. His network, built primarily on my name and my money, swiftly dissolved. Jessica, his wife, fared no better. Her own social ambitions had been largely tied to Mark's perceived future wealth, and when that vanished, so did her standing. Their lavish lifestyle, once funded by my quiet contributions, became unsustainable. The large house I had bought them, which I had initially put in my name but allowed them to live in rent-free, became a flashpoint. Once Mark's lawyers confirmed he had no claim to any of my assets, I issued a formal eviction notice. They had 30 days to vacate. The shock was absolute. Mark called me, his voice a pathetic mix of anger and pleading. "Dad, please, where are we supposed to go? We have no money." I simply replied, "That is a consequence of your own choices, Mark. I am no longer your ATM." He hung up on me, the sound of his frustrated roar echoing through the phone line. They were forced to sell off much of their belongings to pay off their mounting debts. The expensive car I had bought him was repossessed. Their dreams of grandeur crumbled into dust. They ended up moving into a small, cramped apartment, far from the prestigious circles they had once frequented. Emily, throughout all of this, was a pillar of quiet strength and support. She never gloated, never reveled in Mark's misfortune. Instead, she expressed profound sadness for her brother, even as she acknowledged the painful necessity of my actions. "Dad," she said to me one evening, her hand resting gently on mine, "I wish it hadn't come to this. But I understand why you did it. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not for what you have." Her words brought tears to my eyes, tears not of sorrow, but of relief and deep affection. With the legal battles settled and Mark's desperate attempts at sabotage fading into the background, a profound sense of peace settled over me. I had secured my own future, freed myself from the burden of ungrateful expectation, and most importantly, truly seen my children for who they were. Emily and David continued to visit, not because they wanted anything, but because they loved me. They brought over home-cooked meals, helped me with chores around the house, and simply enjoyed my company. The trust I had established provided for them, of course, giving Emily the financial freedom to pursue her passion for teaching without the constant stress of bills, and allowing David to explore some entrepreneurial ventures he had always dreamed of. But they never stopped working, never stopped appreciating the value of what they had. I often sat in my study, looking out at the meticulously maintained gardens of Oakhaven Estates, now cared for by a new gardener I could still afford, thanks to my prudent planning. I reflected on the intricate dance of family, wealth, and loyalty. It was a painful lesson, one that cost me a great deal emotionally, but it was also a necessary one. I had learned that true love and respect cannot be bought. They are earned through genuine connection and selfless appreciation. Mark had chosen a path paved with greed and entitlement, believing that the material world was the only one that mattered. He had mistaken my generosity for weakness, my love for a commodity. He learned in the harshest possible way that the true measure of a man's wealth is not in his bank accounts, but in the richness of his relationships and the integrity of his character. I was no longer an ATM with legs. I was Arthur Finch, a man who had faced betrayal, navigated the waters of injustice, and ultimately found peace in the calm satisfaction of knowing that loyalty, in the end, always finds its just reward, and greed its inevitable reckoning. The past few months had unfolded with a chilling predictability, each scene playing out exactly as I had foreseen, like a meticulously rehearsed play with tragic consequences for those who had misjudged their roles. Mark and Jessica's descent was swift and brutal. The eviction from the beautiful home I had provided them was the first domino to fall. They had nowhere to go, no savings, and a mountain of debt from their extravagant lifestyle. Their calls to me, once demanding, then angry, slowly became desperate, tinged with a raw, ugly pleading. Mark would leave voicemails, his voice cracking, sometimes threatening legal action again, sometimes begging for just a little help to get on their feet. Jessica, too, tried, her voice a fragile whisper promising to change, promising gratitude. But the image of Mark's sneering face, the words ATM with legs still echoed in my mind, a permanent scar on my heart. I never answered their calls. Mr. Henderson had advised me to maintain a strict distance, to communicate only through legal channels if necessary, but largely to cut them off entirely. Any contact, he explained, could be misconstrued as an opening, a sign of weakening resolve. And my resolve, forged in the fires of betrayal, was stronger than steel. I knew that allowing them back into my life, even marginally, would only perpetuate the cycle of exploitation. It was a harsh truth, but a necessary one. They had burned that bridge, not I. They found themselves, as I had predicted, utterly adrift. Mark's so-called business ventures had always been smoke and mirrors, propped up by my capital and his bluster. Without my financial backing, they dissolved, exposing him as a man with grand ideas but no substance. Jessica, whose primary occupation seemed to be spending my money and cultivating a superficial social circle, found her skills entirely unmarketable in the real world. Their social standing, once inflated by my wealth, evaporated faster than mist in the morning sun. The whispers in Oakhaven Estates were subtle at first, then grew louder. People talked about Mark's arrogance, Jessica's airs, and how quickly their facade crumbled once my support was withdrawn. It was a quiet vindication, a confirmation that the community, beneath its polite smiles, had always seen them for who they truly were. I never actively contributed to the gossip, but I didn't silence it either. The truth, in this instance, was its own most powerful messenger. I would occasionally see them, or rather, catch glimpses of their new reality. Once I was driving through a less affluent part of town, on my way to visit Emily, and I saw Mark exiting a discount grocery store carrying a flimsy plastic bag. He was dressed in ill-fitting clothes, his shoulders slumped, his usual swagger completely gone. He looked older, defeated. He didn't see me and I drove past, a pang of something akin to pity but quickly overshadowed by the memory of his cruel laughter, twisting my gut. Another time, Emily mentioned seeing Jessica working as a cashier at a local department store. Emily, with her characteristic kindness, said she almost went to say hello, but decided against it, sensing Jessica's embarrassment. It saddened Emily, but she understood the justice of it all. I knew Emily felt the burden of her brother's downfall, but she never allowed it to diminish her own appreciation for her improved circumstances. The trust I had established had transformed her life, not by making her extravagant, but by lifting a quiet weight from her shoulders. The financial security allowed her to pursue her teaching with renewed vigor, free from the constant worry of bills and future planning. She began investing in her classroom, buying books and supplies for her students out of her own pocket, something she had always done, but now without the pinch of financial strain. David, her husband, used some of the funds to finally launch his small carpentry business, something he had always dreamed of but never dared to risk. He was thriving, finding immense satisfaction in working with his hands and building something of his own. Their guest room, the one they had so generously offered me, was now being renovated into a cozy library for Emily, a place where she could relax with a book, surrounded by the quiet joy of her own creation. My own life had undergone a transformation as well. The quiet determination that had fueled my plan now settled into a deep, abiding peace. The house in Oakhaven Estates, once a symbol of my hard-won success and a potential battleground for inheritance, was now simply my home again. I walked through its spacious rooms, not with a sense of burden but with profound gratitude. I spent more time in the gardens, reconnecting with the earth, pruning roses and tending to my vegetable patch. The bi-weekly gardener, Mr. Davies, a kind man with a weathered face, became a familiar and welcome presence, often sharing stories over a cup of tea. I learned to enjoy the simpler things, the morning coffee on the patio, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the quiet satisfaction of a well-cooked meal shared with Emily and David. They continued to visit regularly, their presence a warm, comforting constant in my life. Our dinners were filled with laughter, genuine conversation, and the easy camaraderie of true family. Emily would bring over her students' artwork, proudly showing me their progress, her eyes shining with the joy of her profession. David would tell me about his latest carpentry projects, his hands calloused and strong, radiating contentment. They never spoke of money unless it was to update me on the sensible management of the trust, always emphasizing their commitment to using it wisely, to honor my legacy, not merely consume it. It was a stark, beautiful contrast to Mark and Jessica's insatiable demands. One evening, as Emily and David were leaving, Emily hugged me tightly. "Dad," she whispered, "you look so much lighter now. Happier." It made me realize just how heavy the weight of their greed had been, a silent burden I had carried for years, slowly crushing my spirit. Now it was gone, lifted by the truth, by the painful but necessary act of severing ties. I found myself engaging more with the community, too. Without the constant worry of Mark's next financial crisis or the gnawing doubt about his character, I felt free to be myself. I joined a local book club, something I had always meant to do, and even started volunteering at the local library, helping them organize their archives. It was fulfilling work, a quiet contribution to a world that had once seemed to be exclusively about acquisitions and appearances. My reflection in the mirror showed a man who had aged, yes, but also one whose eyes held a new clarity, a serenity that had been absent for far too long. The lines around my mouth, once tightened by stress, were now softened by genuine smiles. I had faced a profound betrayal, orchestrated a complex countermove, and emerged not unscathed but ultimately triumphant in spirit. The initial pain of learning Mark and Jessica's true feelings had been akin to a physical blow, a deep wound to my paternal heart. But as the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the wound healed, leaving behind a scar that served as a constant reminder, not of bitterness but of wisdom gained. I understood now with crystal clarity that true love is not transactional. It cannot be bought, nor can it be demanded. It flows from a place of genuine connection, respect, and mutual appreciation. Mark and Jessica had mistaken my love for an endless resource, a wellspring they could exploit without replenishment. They had never bothered to look beyond the surface, never bothered to see me, Arthur Finch, as a man with feelings, with a lifetime of work, with a heart that desired nothing more than the love and respect of his children. They only saw the ATM with legs, a convenient dispenser of wealth, and in their blindness they had forfeited everything. I often thought about Alina, my late wife, and her warnings. She had seen it long before I had, the subtle shifts in Mark's demeanor, the growing entitlement. I wished I had listened to her then, perhaps spared myself some of the heartache. But then again, perhaps this painful journey was necessary for me to truly understand, to truly see the difference between genuine affection and parasitic greed. The lesson was hard-learned, but it was indelible. The irrevocable trust, my carefully crafted fortress against their avarice, stood strong and unyielding. Mr. Henderson confirmed that all legal challenges had ceased. Mark's last desperate attempt had involved a thinly veiled threat of publishing a tell-all book, an utterly baseless and self-serving fabrication that quickly died when his dwindling circle of contacts realized its absurdity and the potential for a libel suit. The public, or what remained of his public, had long since lost interest in his manufactured dramas. Their lives, stripped bare of the opulence and pretense, became a stark testament to the consequences of their choices. I heard through the grapevine that Mark and Jessica had moved again, further away, to a different state even, trying to escape the shadow of their past. They left behind a trail of unpaid bills and broken promises, burning bridges wherever they went. It was a pattern, a sad inevitability for those who believe the world owes them everything without offering anything in return. I felt no satisfaction in their misery, only a quiet certainty that they had sown the seeds of their own destruction. My focus had shifted entirely to the positive aspects of my life. I embraced my role as a grandfather to Emily's children, doting on them, teaching them about the garden, reading them stories, passing on values that had been so conspicuously absent in their uncle's upbringing. Emily and David were raising them with love, discipline, and a strong sense of gratitude, values I deeply admired. I saw the kindness and resilience of Emily reflected in her children, and it filled my heart with a joy that money could never buy. My relationship with Emily deepened into something truly precious. We were no longer father and daughter in the traditional sense, but confidants, friends, a true family unit built on unwavering respect and unconditional love. She would call just to chat, to share a funny story from school, or to simply ask how my day was, never once bringing up the past unless it was to express her gratitude or her concern for me. Her gratitude was never about the money itself, but about the security and freedom it afforded her to live a life aligned with her values. It was a stark contrast to Mark's transactional view of everything, where love was a currency and family was merely a means to an end. Sometimes, when the house was quiet and the evening light streamed through the study window, I would sit in my armchair, reflecting on the intricate tapestry of my life. The threads of hard work, love, betrayal, and justice were all woven together, creating a pattern that, while sometimes painful to behold, was ultimately beautiful in its truth. I had learned that letting go was not a sign of weakness, but of profound strength. Letting go of the illusion of what I wished my relationship with Mark could be, letting go of the guilt I had carried for not heeding Alina's warnings sooner, letting go of the burden of their ceaseless demands. In letting go, I had found liberation. The true revenge, I realized, wasn't just in securing my assets and watching Mark and Jessica face the music of their own making. It was in reclaiming my own peace, my own dignity, and the genuine connections that truly mattered. It was in the quiet joy of a life lived authentically, surrounded by the people who loved me for who I was, not for what I possessed. It was a testament to the fact that while money can buy many things, it cannot buy character, nor can it buy genuine affection. And in the end, it was character and genuine affection that truly defined a rich life. My journey had come full circle. I had started as a man burdened by doubt and exploitation, and now I was a man fulfilled, at peace, and deeply grateful for the lessons learned, however painful they had been. The heavy oak door of my study in Oakhaven Estates still stood, a barrier between worlds, but now the world I inhabited was one of quiet strength, unshakable truth, and profound, unwavering contentment. The shadows of doubt had receded, replaced by the warmth of certainty, knowing that in the grand scheme of things, true loyalty always finds its reward, and true greed, its inevitable, solitary reckoning. And as I looked out at the fading light over my quiet, beautiful home, I knew with absolute clarity that I had won. The quiet joy that settled over Oakhaven Estates, and more importantly over my own heart, was not a sudden explosion of happiness, but a gentle, pervasive warmth, like the first rays of morning sun after a long, dark night. My days, once shadowed by Mark and Jessica's relentless demands and the gnawing doubt about their true intentions, were now filled with a sense of purposeful serenity. I no longer woke with a knot in my stomach, anticipating the next phone call demanding capital or assistance. Instead, I rose with the natural rhythm of the day, eager to tend to my beloved garden, to read a book in my sunlit study, or simply to enjoy the quiet solitude that had once felt lonely, but now felt like a cherished companion. My morning ritual became sacred. A cup of Earl Grey tea, steaming gently on the patio overlooking the sprawling green of my backyard, listening to the birdsong, watching the squirrels chase each other up the ancient oak trees. These were moments of profound peace, a stark contrast to the turbulent years when my mind was constantly wrestling with financial figures, legal strategies, and the painful calculus of paternal love. I found myself reconnecting with hobbies I had long set aside, believing I was too busy or too burdened. My old woodworking tools, gathering dust in the garage, were brought out and meticulously cleaned. I began crafting small, intricate pieces for Emily's home, a sturdy bookshelf for her growing collection of teaching resources, a delicate jewelry box for her daughter, my granddaughter, who possessed Emily's gentle spirit. The smell of sawdust in the air, the feel of smooth, planed wood beneath my fingertips, brought a deep, almost forgotten satisfaction. It was an honest labor with tangible results, unlike the phantom returns of Mark's endless, failed ventures. My physical health, which had subtly suffered under the weight of chronic stress, also began to improve. I walked the extensive paths of my property more often, feeling the fresh air in my lungs, the solid earth beneath my feet. I ate better, cooked by my own hands or by Emily, no longer burdened by the need to maintain a lavish facade. The constant tension in my shoulders, the slight tremor in my hands had eased, replaced by a quiet strength. Mr. Henderson, my financial advisor, noticed the change during our quarterly meetings. His usually stoic expression would soften with a small, knowing smile. "Arthur," he'd say, "you look unburdened." And I would simply nod, a quiet acknowledgement that he, perhaps more than anyone outside my immediate family, understood the profound transformation I had undergone. He continued to manage the irrevocable trust with his usual impeccable discretion, ensuring Emily and her family's future was secure, and that my own resources were managed prudently for my comfort and security. Emily and David's visits became the highlights of my week. They were no longer tinged with the underlying anxiety of Mark's shadow or the unspoken worry that I might fall for another one of his pleas. Their visits were pure, unadulterated joy. Emily would often bring her children, Timothy and Lily, my two grandchildren, their laughter echoing through the halls of a house that once felt too quiet. Timothy, a curious and energetic boy, would help me in the garden, his small hands eager to plant seeds or pull weeds, always asking questions, always genuinely interested. Lily, quieter and more reflective, would sit with me in the study, listening intently as I read stories from old leather-bound books, her imagination sparked by tales of adventure and courage. Watching them, listening to their innocent chatter, I felt a connection that went far deeper than blood. It was a connection of shared values, of mutual respect, of genuine love. These were the moments I had longed for, the true legacy I wished to leave behind. Not just material wealth, but a spirit of kindness, integrity, and genuine human warmth. Emily, as I had hoped, continued her teaching but with a newfound freedom. The trust funds allowed her to invest in her classroom without hesitation, buying innovative learning tools, books, and art supplies for her students, many of whom came from less fortunate backgrounds. She organized field trips that she could now fully subsidize, opening up new worlds for her young charges. Her passion for education, always strong, now burned even brighter, unhindered by financial worries. Her students thrived under her care, and her school community recognized her dedication and generosity. David's carpentry business flourished. With a secure financial foundation and no longer having to work long, grueling hours just to make ends meet, he could focus on the quality of his craft and on truly fulfilling his artistic vision. His custom furniture pieces gained a reputation for their exquisite detail and durable construction. He even hired a couple of young apprentices, teaching them not just the trade, but also the importance of honest work and treating customers with respect. He often came over to show me photographs of his latest creations, his eyes beaming with a pride that was both humble and deeply satisfying. He was building something real, something lasting, with his own hands and his own integrity. The guest room, the one they had offered me when they believed I was in financial distress, had indeed been transformed, but not into a library as I had initially thought. Instead, Emily and David decided to convert it into a bright, airy art studio for Lily, who showed a remarkable talent for drawing and painting. The walls were adorned with her colorful creations, and a small easel stood proudly by the window, bathed in natural light. It was a space dedicated to fostering creativity and joy, a living testament to the values I cherished. The contrast with Mark and Jessica's trajectory continued to be stark. While I never sought out information about them, details would occasionally filter back through the Oakhaven Estates grapevine, whispers carried by well-meaning acquaintances who still respected me. Their move to a different state had, predictably, not been a fresh start but a continuation of their established patterns. Without my seemingly endless financial backing, their attempts at rebuilding their lives were built on sand. Mark's tendency to inflate his importance and his inability to deliver on promises quickly caught up with him in new business ventures. He cycled through short-lived jobs, none of which matched his grandiose self-image. Jessica, accustomed to a life of leisure and luxury, struggled to adapt to the demands of everyday work and budgeting. I heard she had tried various sales positions, but her superficial charm and lack of genuine work ethic quickly became apparent. The Oakhaven Estates community, while generally discreet, was not oblivious. The story of my financial struggles and Mark's indignant reaction had spread, and my subsequent recovery and Emily's quiet prosperity further cemented the understanding of what truly transpired. People still approached me at the grocery store or at local events, offering quiet words of support, small gestures that conveyed their unspoken understanding and approval. They saw the integrity of my actions, and their respect for me deepened. I had not sought public validation, but it was a comforting affirmation that decency and fairness still held value in the world. There were no more calls from Mark or Jessica, no more threats, no more desperate pleas. The silence was absolute, a chilling testament to the finality of their separation from my life. It was not a silence born of satisfaction from their suffering, but a silence that signified the end of a painful chapter, a quiet acceptance of a reality they had themselves created. I often thought about the concept of inheritance, not just of money or property, but of values of character. What had I truly inherited from my parents? A strong work ethic, a sense of honesty, a quiet dignity. And what had I passed on to my children? To Emily, I had clearly instilled these same values, and she had embraced them and amplified them. To Mark, I had perhaps offered too much, too easily, preventing him from ever truly understanding the value of earning, of struggle, of genuine appreciation. He had inherited my wealth but squandered my values. That was the real tragedy, not the loss of money, but the loss of character. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Emily and I sat on the porch, sipping iced tea. She rested her head on my shoulder, a simple, loving gesture that spoke volumes. "Dad," she said softly, "you seem truly happy now." "I am, my dear," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "More than I thought possible." I explained to her how the weight of the secret, the burden of their expectation, had been heavier than any financial strain. How the act of taking control, of asserting my own worth, had been a liberation. She understood. She always did. Her empathy was a rare and beautiful thing. We talked about Alina, my wife, her wisdom and her warnings. I confessed my regrets for not having listened to her sooner, for having been blinded by a paternal hope that Mark would eventually mature, that he would see the light. Emily gently squeezed my hand. "We all learn lessons in our own time, Dad. What matters is that you learned it and you found your peace." Her words resonated deeply. It was true. The lesson was costly, both financially and emotionally, but it was invaluable. It taught me that true wealth lies not in accumulation but in connection, not in what you possess but in who you are and who you choose to surround yourself with. The grand house in Oakhaven Estates, once a potential stage for family drama and greed, was now simply a home, a sanctuary of peace and love. Its walls held memories, both painful and joyous, but the dominant emotion now was one of profound gratitude. Gratitude for the second chance I had been given, gratitude for Emily and David's unwavering love, gratitude for the laughter of my grandchildren. I continued my volunteering at the local library, finding immense satisfaction in the quiet organization of knowledge, the gentle rustle of turning pages, the grateful smiles of patrons. It was a world far removed from the cutthroat financial dealings and family manipulations I had endured, a world of simple, tangible contributions. I joined a gardening club, sharing tips and tricks with fellow enthusiasts, delighting in the camaraderie and the shared passion for nurturing life. These connections were genuine, built on shared interests and mutual respect, a stark contrast to the transactional relationships I had once been forced to maintain. The scars of the past remained, a subtle ache in my memory, but they no longer defined me. They served as a reminder not of bitterness, but of the strength I had found within myself, the clarity I had gained. I learned that forgiveness, in some cases, isn't about absolving the other person, but about releasing yourself from the burden of anger and resentment. I didn't hate Mark or Jessica. I simply no longer had a place for them in my life or in my heart. They had made their choices, and they were living with the consequences. My choice was to live a life of peace, integrity, and genuine connection. And in that choice, I found true victory. As the years gently rolled on, the tranquility of my life became a testament to the power of quiet resilience and the unwavering belief in justice, even when that justice had to be self-administered. My hair turned whiter, my steps a little slower, but my spirit remained vibrant, filled with a contentment that defied the passage of time. Emily and David continued to thrive, their family growing, their lives a beacon of the values I held so dear. Their children, Timothy and Lily, blossomed into thoughtful, compassionate individuals, always quick with a hug for their old grandpa, always eager to share their day. They were the future, and in them, I saw the enduring legacy of a love that was pure and untainted by avarice. The heavy oak door of my study still felt like a barrier, but now it guarded a world of peace, wisdom, and an unshakable inner calm, a world where the echoes of greed and betrayal had finally faded, replaced by the gentle hum of a life truly, honestly lived. I knew with every fiber of my being that I had not only protected my legacy, but had also found the truest meaning of wealth, not in the ledger books, but in the heart. My journey, though painful, had led me to a destination more profound and rewarding than any fortune could ever buy. And in that quiet understanding, I found my ultimate, everlasting peace.